We have the preliminary 15-page report prepared by the AAIB, which is investigating the crash at the Ahmedabad airport. Now, we've been live here on Republic TV and republicworld.com since Saturday morning, talking about what really happened. Now, this report primarily, and this is what experts are saying, report hints at what happened, but the report doesn't conclude on why it happened. And to speak about the preliminary report, I have with me Group Captain Anant Mathur. Group Captain Anant Mathur is a test pilot, a former Indian Air Force officer with over a decade of experience as captain and trainer in commercial aviation as well. And he's been live on Republic TV giving us his expert opinion on what he feels about the initial findings. Group Captain Mathur, thank you for joining us here on republicworld.com.
Thank you.
I saw especially your anger when some people tried to suggest that the pilots could have acted faster / better in a situation like this. Now, what do we know so far? We know that the fuel control switch went from run to cut off, and I have the full sequence of events. It happened in a split second. And they tried to ask each other, did you cut off? No, I didn't cut off. And there is also correspondence here which talks about how they tried to bring it back on. Specifically, engine 1 fuel cutoff switch transitioned from cutoff to run, and 4 seconds later, engine 2 fuel cutoff switch also transitions from cutoff to run, and then 9 seconds later, there is a mayday call. What do you make of the role of the pilots in this initial report, sir?
First thing I want to tell you is that I am no one here to defend the pilots or say anything here for or against them. What we need to do at this stage is to make sure that we draw our conclusions based on the data available and do not meander into mindless allegations. I saw some captain in white skin commenting about pilots' health, giving an example of what he faced 20 years ago in US Navy with a pilot whose father was not well. He did not directly hint at these pilots having any problems, but what was left unsaid was equally well understood by those on what is left said in the podcast by him. Similarly, the same pilot was mentioning that probably the flap lever has been lifted up. 2 days later, he came out, probably they have switched off the fuel or there is a single engine failure which the pilots could not handle. Then finally, he came out saying that, ram air turbine has come out. So I go back on all what I said. And today he's again hinting at something about the mental health of pilots. So what I want to say and what I want to indicate is that when we are talking about anything which is against the professionalism of two people who are not even here to defend themselves, we should choose our words with caution. And if there is undeniable proof of unprofessionalism or any other activity, that needs to come out very clearly with undeniable proof. Because that is what you would expect. That is basic human decency about what you are trying to say. So I am not angry. I'm just suggesting that before you take that call, you should be very clear. Now, let me also tell you the location of these two switches. Firstly, these switches are designed in such a way that if I want to move the switch from off position to on position, it's a 3-step process. The first step, I have to lift the lever. Then it disengages from a mechanical catch. Then I push the lever in the on position, and then it slides back into the on position. Just because my finger gets caught, because my cufflink gets caught, does not mean that I can accidentally push the lever from on to off or off to on position. Second aspect that I want to make is that this fuel shut-off valve going to off or on position It is based on a sensor position. This sensor position is located at the fuel shutoff valve. It is not located at the switch position. So when I put the switch from off to on, an electrical signal goes and it powers the fuel shutoff valve to on position. So when it powers it to on position, that is when this power supply goes there. Now, I am not very familiar with the Boeing 787, but when you are designing an aircraft like this, suppose there is an engine fire and you want to cut off the fire extinguisher. When you put off the fire extinguisher, 5, 6, 7 things happen together along with the fire extinguisher being pressed. So this switch gets inputs from multiple positions. These are complex aircraft. There are multiple inputs to this switch. Some of them are pilot operated. Some of them switch on or switch off this system based on what the aircraft senses at this stage. So when the pilots have seen within 2 seconds both the engines going off, then it cannot be an accident by one pilot. Because as a trainer, when I fly, I train people who are sitting for the first time on the right seat. When they are sitting on the right seat, I am very careful that a young pilot by mistake does not put the flap lever up instead of the landing gear. Now, in this case, we have very senior, very professional, very experienced pilots. I think the captain has close to 15,000 hours. The co-pilot has close to 3,500 hours. So their experience level is high enough not to make a mistake of raising the flap, which was being discussed before, or to select both the switches on or both the switches off within seconds. It is virtually impossible. That is what, when as a test pilot, I can say that this is a design aspect to make sure that there is no inadvertent selection of the switch, which is very critical, by mistake. So that is why I find it ludicrous to suggest that when I am sitting on one of the seats, I put off the switches by looking on the left or the right, and the other pilot who's also taking off does not appreciate from the side view, or what I call as the peripheral view, what is happening. When I'm taking off, even as a co-pilot or as a captain, in this case, the captain was the pilot monitoring. He had nothing to do but watch the pilot flying, which is the co-pilot, take off the aircraft. So to come out with an idea that somehow the pilots are responsible, I feel is a very poor commentary on judging what you need to judge. Second aspect is that the height above the ground at which this has happened, could the pilots have done anything else? That is where I really feel sad for all the passengers and all the people on the ground, all the cabin crew, all the pilots, because if they had more height, probably. Now, how much, I am no one to comment on that. It can be seen in the simulator when you practice some of the profiles and you give yourself dual engine failure and you prepare yourself for it. And at the last moment, after multiple practices, you select one engine and second engine, and somehow you are able to recover this aircraft. But at this height, when this dual engine failure happened, let me be very clear to you, nobody could have saved the aircraft. Nothing which the pilots would have done would have saved this aircraft and recovered the aircraft.
You mentioned a certain former pilot in white skin. You referred to this person, whoever it is. I don't know who it is. Maybe he's live on some other channels trying to peddle a narrative. And the reason I'm asking you this question is because there is also a narrative war that's on. Very evidently, because there may be some with vested interests trying to save the manufacturer. Some may be trying to shield the engine maker. Some may be trying to shield even Air India. Now, we don't know. Now, these are assumptions, but of course, there are different factors at play. And I heard you speak about that. We have to be very careful about that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that when it is so many people's reputations are at stake, and when big companies they do bother about their reputations. But the fact is that the data has come out, and I feel that data is available. Maybe they could have added a little more facts in this data so as to shut down some of the ideas. And I think it is a very complex problem. What they have found does not have a simplistic solution. So they need more time. Could they have done a little bit more before they came out with the preliminary report after the data was downloaded? Maybe yes. Could it have shut down certain lines of thought? Maybe yes. But I am not sitting in those seats, so it is relatively easier for me to comment. But having said that, and having been associated with certain inquiries, I can say that certain things can definitely be ruled out, and this inquiry report does not make that effort.
My next question to you, sir, from the facts at hand, in this report, I'm just going through the facts one by one as we know it. There is the RAT which is activated, right? Immediately when it's right above the tarmac on the runway, it's just taken off and the RAT is activated, right? And I have a picture of that. And we'll show the picture of that as we speak in the podcast as well. This is the ram air turbine getting deployed during the initial climb immediately after liftoff. So seconds after liftoff, or maybe a second after liftoff, it's already activated, indicating that something is already wrong. The plane is detected that something is malfunctioning, perhaps. Now from the picture, that is very clear. The picture is here. It's a CCTV grab of AI-171 on the tarmac, on the runway, immediately after takeoff. Now, my second point, we have the fuel switch question, the cutoff. How did it happen? Because it can only happen manually. And if both went off and were brought back on too late, too little could be done in those few seconds. Like you said, there is a process to it. Now, point number 3, the thrust lever was in idle. Now, we don't know whether that was a position that investigators found out after the crash, or was it before the crash? But it does indicate that there was lack of fuel perhaps going into the engine, and they have concluded that the engines, both of them, failed. Is there anything that the pilots could have done at all? Because it appears from the conversation from the two black boxes, and you go through the timeline of what happened when, right? It's such clear conversation that we have here listed in the initial report, which talks about those 24 minutes. I think it's 24 minutes. There are about 9 conversations, right? And from 7:43 UTC to 8:09, roughly 24, 25 minutes, everything was fine. But in exactly 92 seconds after takeoff, everything seemed to have gone wrong. Anything that the pilots could have done, or anything that was in their control?
Actually, I can just cover and walk you through with what happens, what you practice for. This kind of training that you flame out both the engines immediately after liftoff is called as negative training. That can bring into pilots fear that it can happen tomorrow. So what is practiced in the simulator, which we do every 6 months, is a single engine failure at all stages. It could be on the ground, it could be after you reach a decision speed wherein you are supposed to continue the takeoff, or it could happen, single engine failure, it could happen as you are rotating the aircraft. Pilots are very proficient, and the aircraft is designed in such a way that it will be comfortably not only able to lift off but fly up and away from the ground when the single engine fails. But if both engines fail at liftoff or just after liftoff, while the picture can be seen and the tarmac can be seen, we need to find out what exactly is the time in seconds of this picture. Because we are seeing that 3 to 5 seconds after liftoff is when the fuel shut-off valve has indicated it going to cut off from run. So now the 3 to 5 seconds is what I am saying is when the lot of transition from weight on wheel switch happens. This weight on wheel switch passes data to so many people that that we are now transitioning from a ground phase to flight phase. And this goes to and empowers so many systems. So on the ground, if I bring my thrust levers to reverse, my thrust reversers will operate. The moment I go to flight phase, even if I bring my thrust levers to reverse position, my thrust reversers will not operate. This is to make sure inadvertent operation by anybody in the air is a safety mechanism. Similarly, there are electrical switches, there are flight control switches, there are so many switches which get input from this weight on wheel switch. And even electrical systems get these inputs. Has something happened there which has switched off and caused what I call as a cascading failure? It means that one system fails and a second later, the second system also fails. However, as I would say that at the design stage as a test pilot, I can say that there is a failure mode analysis which is carried out, which makes sure that no single switch operation can cause a dual engine failure. That is one of the key inputs. Not only have you to demonstrate it, you have to fail each and every system to prove that it will not happen. But systems are so complex that it has happened in the past on a Boeing 787 of Japan Airlines in 2019. I would like to know what was the result of that. And what did the Boeing company and what did the engine manufacturer say that why it happened? And are there any links with that kind of a failure, with this failure? The only difference in this is that in that case, the aircraft had landed and it was safe. In this case, unfortunately, the aircraft had taken off and it happened at such low levels that it was very difficult for our pilots to discover anything. Please remember, during takeoff, this happens, the system goes from ground phase to flight phase. During landing, the system goes from flight phase to ground phase. And that is when it happened in that case also. So what are the triggers? What are the relays? What are the electrical systems that are energized? I think there is a need to draw a deeper conclusion and equivalence to find out what happened in that case as compared to what happened in this case. And if we have the video of the pilots in the preliminary report as brought out, that there is a cockpit video which is part of the FDR recordings, I think this is the time for AAIB to take it out and showcase that the pilots did not move the levers at all, so that we can focus on the real thing. Because remember, people are flying this aircraft day in and day out all across the world. And they deserve an answer whether it happened because of pilot error or because of system error. And if it is a system error or technical defect, then it needs to be put right as soon as possible.
My final question to you is, there is a video, there is a recording in the cockpit, there's a video recording. So it finds no mention here in the initial report. We know that both the black boxes were recovered. There are some reports that suggest that one of the black boxes need to be studied further. It's still being analyzed. One of them has been analyzed and parts of the audio conversation between the pilots has been put on record here. Looking at the pilots themselves, you mentioned Captain Sabharwal was 56 years old, 15,600 flying hours, including more than 8,500 on the Boeing 787. First Officer Kundar, 32 years old, 3,400 flying hours, had been with Air India since 2017. Both were licensed, qualified to operate the Boeing 787. One of our panelists this morning, someone very senior who's been an aviation expert, Captain Minu Vadia, he said something interesting. He said, I'm not ruling out a sabotage angle the way I see it, right? Now, of course, many would call it conspiracy theories, right? But looking at how you mentioned cascading failure, failure after failure within 3 to 4 seconds, which is highly unusual, never heard of, right? It's unlikely that in a day and age like this, when everything is almost automated, it's foolproof, that everything failed at once and there was nothing that the pilots could do. Now, I'm not suggesting there is sabotage, but can you rule out sabotage? And if there was an element of sabotage, at what level could that sabotage have happened? Or do you think it is possible at all in this case?
So again, I am no one to comment against or for anyone. I will just give my independent view on what I feel happens in these modern aircraft. So there are certain switches which are supposed to be in a certain position. And whenever a maintenance certifies that the aircraft is fit for operations, they carry out a bite test, which is a built-in test inside the system, which clears system that there are all systems go or not. At the design stage, when you are designing an aircraft like this, and please remember, Boeing 787 has been flying for a long time. What everybody tries to do is make the aircraft idiot proof. So we are not looking at malfeasance at all. We are looking at simple mistakes which people can make. And the whole aim of the design is to make sure that there is no single switch or position which can not be monitored, especially after when the aircraft has started up, to tell you that this would have happened or this can happen. So I'm not familiar with the Boeing 787 system to the extent that I can say or rule out a design flaw. I am not an expert that somebody who puts this switch off, pilots will get an indication. They will get a amber warning or a red warning depending on the situation. Please see that from the time the engines have started up to the time that the aircraft has got full power, it has not given a single warning to the pilots. That means everything was working the way it is supposed to work. And if there was some sabotage which has happened, I am no one to comment on it because I do not have the technical knowledge or the data to say that this could be a problem. So, I mean, I respect everyone who has their view and they are experts in their own right. But to throw something without any data, because I can only speak based on data. And all my years in test flying, all my years as a civil airline pilot, it is very difficult to have something turned off, which will turn off both engines at the same time without giving a warning to the pilot. It is difficult for it to happen like that without getting a warning. Somehow, 3 seconds after liftoff, we can cut off fuel shut-off valves on both sides and not give any chance to the pilots to recover that aircraft at all. This would be a murder and it can happen again anytime. But again, the Boeing aircraft is flying for a long time. I mean, you've seen incidents where people have covered the static vents. They have covered they have taken off with the angle of attack probe shielded. So system not getting warning at all. And these accidents have happened in the past. Airliners and the aircraft manufacturers have tried to cover every loophole possible and make sure that is the reason why aviation is the safest mode of travel. That is why people trust aviation like that. And that is why we are discussing it so deep. You would be discussing a train accident so deeply with the train experts from Indian Railways because aviation, you have data to prove something. Everything is recorded, not just every second, but some of this data is recorded multiple times every second. We call them 4 hertz, 8 hertz, 16 hertz data recording. And the RPM from both the engines, when they started winding down, that data will be available. I wish that was part of the AAIB report. I wish it had given when exactly was the RAT input given so that we are not debating when did it actually happen. This is important piece of data which is available to them right now. It can come out in next 10 seconds if somebody were to really lay hands on that report. And that would probably explain some of the things that we are, talking as possibilities rather than, having firm data and say that, hey, this is what has happened.
My final possibility, the final question that I have for you. I won't take more of your time. Now, the final in this report, I found it very interesting that, if they are not getting into the details of it, they will wait for the final report. But there is a very, very interesting mention of the FAA in 2018 issuing a special airworthiness information bulletin, or an SAIB, in December 2018 regarding potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. And this was based on reports from operators of the 737 aeroplanes that fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would warrant airworthiness directive by the FAA. And as per the information, the report also says that Air India, when the investigators checked with them, suggested inspections, what FAA had suggested in 2018, suggested inspections were not carried out, as the SAIB advisory, it was just an advisory basically. It was not mandatory, so that's what Air India said, it was an advisory. So perhaps indicating that they did not follow it. And I have a follow-up communication from 2020-2021 from GE, the engine makers, asking for certain checks to be made, changes to be made on engines, specifically on the LOTC, which is I think the lack of thrust control feature, for it to be foolproof, specifically to the fuel switch control. Now, these are aspects that are very alarming because someone had to act, whether it's Boeing or whether it's Air India. Now, we don't know where the buck will stop, but certainly these are questions that have been put in our minds with this report.
Yeah, I would look at both the things and the degree of probability. When you design an aircraft and you certify an aircraft, as a certification agency, I will say, what if the wing falls off? What will you do about it? So the manufacturer has to prove to the certification agency that even if, why will the wing can't fall off? Because we have done load testing on this. We expect this wing to hit 5G and we have tested it to 7G and we have made it happen so many times. And after 2000 hours, we open these inspection panels to view the, the nuts which are holding the wing, and there will be progressive degradation. So what I'm not, again, trying to alarm people, but what I'm trying to tell you is that each and every aspect of failure analysis is addressed in this period. Now comes to the question of whether there is a probability of a wing falling off. In 1:10 billion hours, you have to prove that it cannot fall off. And that is what is done when you are discussing that, okay, the takeoff has happened and both the fuel shutoff valves had the same problem, and both the fuel shutoff valves came from the on gate or the run gate to the cutoff gate simultaneously. When you talk about degree of probability, it goes beyond fathomable belief. It is the second part that I'm worried about, the GE control unit, which says that this could cause a electrical or electronic shutoff of the engine. That is something that comes to what I call as a cascading failure, happens on one, happens on the other. And has this been the reason for the fault? Again, it's in the realm of possibility. The first one, when I say it is not in the realm of possibility, is because this thing is a mechanical feature. For both the mechanical systems to fail at the same time, again, defies belief. And when we calculate as test pilots the degree of probability, it goes into billions, 10 raised to power minus 15, it can happen. It can happen, but it will happen once in 10 raised to minus 15 times, when you try it. So it is considered a non-issue actually. But the second one, that could be an issue. I think there would be more analysis required there. Again, I am no one to comment on this with the limited data that I have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Group Captain Anand Mathur, for speaking to Republic. I have so many questions, and I'm sure every viewer has questions looking at this report. Like most people, including yourself, are saying, there are more questions today than answers. We know what happened, we don't know why it happened, and I think we'll wait for that report to come out. But for the families, certainly there is no closure, and justice has to be done. And we will wait for that final report. Group Captain Mathur, thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.